Warped Styles by Ian Watson. Read by Adam Nichol. On Jomi Jabal's 16th birthday, he watched a witch being broken in the market square of Groxgeld. The time was the cool of the evening. The harsh blue sun had set a while since. The night with its star lanterns was a couple of hours away as yet. The saffron-hued gas giant still bulged hugely in the wispy sky, shouldering high above the horizon like some mountainous desert dune. Its light gilded the tiled roofs of the town and the dusty, hoof-printed street. That golden giant in the sky seemed to be such a furnace, such a molten crucible. Yet, unlike the sun, it dispensed no heat. Jomi wondered how that could be, but he knew better than to ask. When he was younger, a few whippings had deterred him from excessive curiosity. His pa's punishments had been well intended. Boys and girls who questioned were perhaps on the road to becoming witches themselves. A trumpet would sound from the watchtower after the golden giant did finally sink out of sight. That braying screech signalled curfew at the onset of darkness. Thereafter, mutants were said to prowl the black streets. Did mutants really roam Groxgeld by night, hunting for victims, seeking entries into the homes of the unwise? It struck Jomi as a convenient arrangement that the townsfolk were exiled to their houses during the cooler hours. Otherwise, the taverns of Groxgeld may well have remained open longer. Workmen may have caroused till late, and thus be tired when dawn came, grumpy and lethargic at their labours during the hot day. Oh, but mutants certainly existed, without a doubt. Witches, hoodooists. Here was another one, bound upon the wheel. 2 hours till darkness. "This witch uses a cunning trick," Reverend Henrik Farb, the preacher, proclaimed to the crowd from the Ebon steps of the headman's residence. "He can hoodoo time itself. He can stop the flow of the time stream, though not for very long, so do not run away in fear. Witness his punishment, and mark my words. The witch looks human, but in truth he is distorted. Beware of those who seem human, yet are not." Farb was a fat fellow. Beneath his black cloak, leather armour bulged in a manner that, had he been a woman, might have been described as voluptuous. Womanly, too, was the jade perfume phial dangling from one pierced nostril, intercepting the odours of manure and of bodies on which the sweat had barely dried. The tattoo of a chained, burning demon caged within a hex symbol writhed upon one chubby cheek while he spoke, guarding his mouth and porcine eyes from contamination. Usually the preacher wore loose black silks on account of the heat, which was only now draining away. For combat with evil, though, he must needs be suitably protected. A holstered stub gun hung from the amulet-studded belt around his rotund waist. Horses snickered and stamped. Men patted their long knives for comfort, and for the few who owned such, their rune-daubed muskets. "Destroy the deviant!" shouted one fervent voice. "Break the unhuman!" cried another. "Whack the witch!" Farb eyed the brawny, half-naked executioner who stood beside the wheel, gripping a cudgel. As usual, the agent of retribution had been chosen by lot. Most townsfolk might sport wins, carbuncles, and other blemishes of their burnt skin, but few were feeble. Even if so, a puny executioner would only take longer to perform his task to the tune of jeers and mocking cheers.
I declared Farb. I warned you that this witch would try to slow down his punishment, stretching it out till nightfall in the vain hope of rescue.
Spittle flew from the preacher's lips as if he was one of those mutants who could spit poison. Such a mutant had been rooted out a few months earlier, gagged and broken in this selfsame square. The front ranks of Farb's audience pressed closer to the Ebon steps, as if a drop of spray from the preacher's lips might keep their vision clear, their humanity intact. Farb turned to the standard of the Emperor, which flanked him. The townswomen had painstakingly embroidered in precious wires an image copied from the preacher's missal. When Farb genuflected, his audience hastily bent their knees.
"God, Emperor," chanted the preacher, "oh, our source of security, protect us from foul demons. Guard the wombs of our women, that we mites are not twisted into mutants. Save us from the darkness within darkness. Oh, watch over us as we carry out your will. Impariata honorarium, nostralta salviator."
Sacred words, those last powerful hex words. Farb snorted through one nostril, spat saliva at the crowd. Jomi gazed at the standard. That age-old imperial face was a mask of wires and tubes, which the metallic embroidery pervasively evoked.
"Begin!"
shouted Farb. The wheel, which was powered by a massive, firmly wound spring, began to turn. It carried the witch around, his limbs bent into a half-hoop. The executioner raised his club. Nothing happened. The wheel stood still. The stalwart was frozen. Though forewarned, the crowd groaned. The spectators outside the small zone of hoodoo time, cast by the doomed witch, they could still move around, yet hardly a body moved.
"At this very moment," Farb explained, "the witch might be calling out with its mind to some vile demon, leading it here, showing the way to Groxgeld."
Jomi wondered if this was true. If so, why not slay the witch speedily with a knife as soon as captured? Maybe the preacher relished the ceremony for its own sake. Certainly such a spectacle riveted the crowd and dramatized their deepest fears. Otherwise the people might grow careless, no? They might fail to report suspicions of mutants in their midst. A mother might try to protect a child of hers who only seemed slightly twisted. Though wouldn't the permanent presence of the wheel in the market square put such fear into hoodnists that they would try their utmost to hide their witching ways, and not betray themselves? Jomi puzzled about this. The timeless moment ended. As the delayed cudgel descended crackingly, the witch screamed. Time paused once again in his immediate vicinity. Presently another blow fell, crushing flesh and snapping bone. Due to his futile evasions, the witch did indeed take much longer to be broken, and would take longer to hang draped around the wheel, slowly dying in utter pain. Now, what else could the wretch have done?
"Praised be the Emperor who protects," cried the paunchy preacher. "Laudit imperiorem."
His leather-clad breasts and belly quaked. He panted as he sniffed perfume, blood, excrement, sweat. Each time that a new blow fell, Jomi felt a fierce itch at a different location within the marrow of his own bones, as if he was experiencing a hint of that excruciating punishment through a filter of a pile of pillows. He wriggled and scratched, uselessly. Over the course of the next year, a dozen more witches and muties died in the square of Groxgeld. A few of the more vocal townsfolk began to ask in their cups whether there could be some sickness unique to the human seed, which did not plague beast kind. Mares did not give birth to foals which developed strange powers as they matured, did they now? Jomi's father, who was a tanner of lizard hides, discouraged any such speculation under his own roof, and Jomi had long since learned to hold his tongue. Preacher Farb encouraged the townsfolk as well as terrifying them. He promised that the Emperor would not let his people drift into chaos. On Jomi's 17th birthday, he dreamt the first dream. It seemed that a mouth was shaping itself inside his brain. It was forming from out of the very substance of the grey matter within his skull. In his dream, he knew this was so. If only he could turn his dream eyes backwards, he could see the lips deep within his cranium, and between them, the lolloping tongue that was responsible for the soup-sucking sounds he heard in his sleep. Terror gripped him in his dream. Somehow he couldn't awaken until those eternal lips had finished their slobbery mumblings and shut up. Over the course of the next several nights, those interior sounds came more closely to resemble words. As yet, these words were too blurred to understand, but they seemed to be becoming clearer, almost as if they adjusted themselves to the words that Jomi knew. Jomi shared a poky garret room with his elder brother, Big Ven. Naturally, he did not inquire whether Ven dreamed of a similar voice, or if Ven ever woke up in the wee hours and thought he heard a whisper coming from within Jomi's brain. Always the wheel stood in the marketplace as a warning. Jomi sweated as he slumbered. His straw bed was damp each morning. Am I becoming unhuman? He asked himself anxiously. Maybe he was only experiencing nightmares. He dismissed any notion of consulting Reverend Farb. Instead, he prayed fervently to the Emperor to dismiss the mumblings from his mind. Each blue dawn, along with a band of fellow labourers, Jomi walked out of town to the Grox breeding station and farm. Stripped to his loincloth and charm necklace, he toiled in an annex of a slaughter shed, sorting offal. You're lucky, his short, sturdy mother often told him. Such a soft job at your age. This was true. The big reptiles were notoriously vicious. If they had not provided meat that was delicious to eat and highly nourishing, and if they had not been so well able to nourish themselves on any rubbish tossed their way, even soil, any sane person would have steered clear of them. Although the breeding specimens were kept sedated with chemicals, a beast may still go berserk. When penned alongside its fellows, that was the natural inclination of a grox. The meat stock were lobotomized. When being driven to the slaughter, even these brain-cut brutes could prove fractious. Any grox herdsman or butcher could lose a finger, or an eye, or even his life. Virtually all bore disfiguring scars. The rulers in Urpel, the capital city an unimaginable 100 kilometers away, demanded an endless supply of grox meat for their own consumption and for profitable export. Refrigerated robot floaters carried the meat to Urpel. You're well-flavoured, Jomi's mother had also told him more than once. This was true, too. Jomi was clean-limbed and clean-featured, unblemished by the cysts and warts which afflicted most of the population. It was the farmer's wife, Tubby Galandra Pushik, who had assigned Jomi his cushy billet. Madame Pushik would often wander through the offal shed to ogle Jomi slicked with blood and sweat. Especially she would loiter by the farm pond to leer at him when he was washing after a day's work. Oh yes, she had her eye on him. But she was too scared of her bullying husband to do more than look. Jomi had his own eyes set wistfully on the Pushik's daughter, Gretchi. A slim beauty, Gretchi wore a broad straw hat and carried a parasol to shade herself from the bright blue sunlight. She turned up her pert nose at most of the town's youths, though she favoured Jomi with a smile when her mother wasn't watching, and then his heart would beat fast. From occasional words he and she had exchanged, he knew that Gretchi's sights were set on becoming mistress to one of the lordly rulers in Urpol. But maybe she might care to practice with him first. That day, while Jomi sorted Grox livers, kidneys, and hearts, the mouth within his brain began to speak to him, clearly, caressingly. Be calm, it cooed. Don't fear me. I can teach you much you need in order to survive.
and to gratify your young desires. Aye, to survive, for you are different, are you not?
What are you? Jomi thought fiercely, and even then he resisted the impulse to speak out loud and risk being overheard by a fellow worker. Was the languid voice male or female? Perhaps neither. What are you, voice?
Before you can understand the answer, you need to learn much. Tell me, what shape has your world?
Shape? Well, it's all sorts of shapes. It's smooth and rocky, it's up and down.
Seen from afar, Jomi. Seen from afar so that the hills and valleys are as nothing. Seen by a bird flying higher than any bird has ever flown.
I guess, like a plate?
Oh, no. Listen, Jomi. Your world is globular, like an eyeball. Your world is a big moon that swings around a giant world wholly made of gas, which is an even bigger eyeball. Your blue sun is the hugest eyeball hereabouts.
How can that be? The sun's so much smaller than the giant.
But hotter. Have you ever wondered why it's hotter?
Sure I have.
But you thought it wiser not to ask. Wise, Jomi, wise.
How the voice fondled him.
You can ask me without fear. Your sun is so vast that its own weight burns it. It's a star, and so far away it looks like a thumbnail at arm's length. As I myself am far away from you, Jomi.
The voice seemed to sigh.
Indeed, much further than your star.
Jomi continued sorting the slippery, reeking entrails into different trays. It can't be a star. The star lanterns are tiny and cold.
Ah, innocent youth. The stars aren't lanterns. Let's take this step by step, shall we? Your moon and your sun and the giant and the stars are all spherical in nature.
Spherical?
What words this voice knew, such as the lords in Urple might use. Circular. Think loudly of a circle floating in an empty space.
I'd rather not. The circle was the shape of the wheel, the terrible taboo wheel. No man must make any wheel, nor use the one save the punishment wheel, or else witches would triumph and rule the world.
Calm yourself, sweet youth. The wheel is the beginning of knowledge. I will tell you why, if you concentrate on imagining a circle.
It will help me to focus on you.
Focus? To see you, as through a lens.
What's a lens?
Oh, you have so much to learn, and I will be your secret teacher.
When Jomi washed himself later, Galandra Pushik stood with hands on giant hips, surveying him as if he were the next day's dinner, and to his horror he overheard her thoughts.
She lusted to run her meaty hands all over Jomi. She yearned to knead him like dough, then bake him like bread in her hot embrace. Farmer Pushik would be going on a business trip away from the farm some day soonish. Then she would enjoy the boy.
Jomi could hear thoughts. It was as if the voice in his head was massaging muscles of his brain that had been puny as threads until now, was tickling sensation into nerves of his mind that had previously lain loose, causing them to knot and knit. He could hear thoughts, therefore he was a witch.
Be tranquil, the voice advised. Yet think loudly of the circle. Thus I can find you, thus I can save you, my bewitching boy. For many days, the voice told Jomi about the pleasures and beauties of the wider universe beyond his farming moon, where there was only toil and sweat and fear. The delights and glories that the voice described seemed somehow like memories of memories, echoes of echoes, as if the experiences in question had occurred too many years ago to count, and the voice no longer quite understood their nature, yet felt compelled to recount them even so. In the cabin of the space cruiser, Human Loyalty, Inquisitor Torque Sepilian brooded about the paradox which had begun to haunt him. He keyed his coded diagram and spoke to it. It has been a week since we emerged safely from the warp space. We are in orbit around the gas giant Delta Kumari 5. Beyond the quadrifold tracery of the viewport, a huge orange ball of storming hydrogen and methane held on an invisible leash the crescent of a single large moon that gleamed with atmosphere. Proboscium. For millennia past, our undying Emperor has defended humanity against psychic attack from the warp, so that one far-off day, humankind could evolve psychic powers puissant enough to defend itself. Battle banners hung from the plasteel walls, which were the hue of dried blood. Bleached alien skulls and captured armor were mounted as trophies, for this was a ship of the Legionis Astartes, the Space Marines. Yet, aliens as such rarely worried Sepilian. Even the most devious of aliens were, after all, natural creatures, born and bred in the same universe as humankind. Aliens were nothing compared to the terrible parasites that dwelled in the warp. On Sepilian's home world, a certain unpleasant wasp would inject its hooked legs into the flesh of beasts and men. Warp parasites could lay their equivalent of eggs in human minds. Those eggs would hatch into entities that controlled the body, consuming it and using it to spread contamination. Other warp creatures could seize human souls and drag them back into the darkness to feast upon, slowly. And there were far mightier demonic entities than that. Psycho-witches were beacons shining into the warp. They attracted parasites and demons that could lay waste to a world and make its people unhuman. Sub-proposition. Wild, unguided, wayward psychers must be sought out by our Inquisition and destroyed. Counter-proposition. So, to nourish our Emperor, hundreds of fresh young psychers must daily sacrifice their souls. Aye, gladly too, to feed his own huge, anguished soul. Yes, indeed. Emerging psychers were sought out avidly and sent to Earth by the shipload. Those of high caliber who could be trained to serve the Imperium were soul-bound to the Emperor for their own protection, an agonizing ritual which generally left them blind. Exceptional individuals, such as Sepilian, were allowed to guard themselves mentally. The cream of such free psychers became Inquisitors. Yet daily hundreds of those transportees to Earth, duly guided in the blessings of sacrifice, were yielding up their lives in the sucking gullet of the God Emperor's mind. And yet, elsewhere throughout the galaxy, untamable psychers were being exterminated as witches. Paradoxius. We root out as weeds what we cannot harvest, yet whether we harvest or root out, the new crop is largely crushed, so in far as it is within our power. How then can humankind evolve that independent future strength it so desperately needs? Sepilian imagined a meadow of grass being trampled repeatedly for millennia. He visualized new green blades struggling up into the light, only to be flattened remorselessly, lest they feed the malevolent creatures of the warp. Would the Emperor eventually relax his crushing pressure by permitting himself to die, thus allowing the grass suddenly to sprout up straight and tall and strong, a crop of superhumans? Yet until that wonderful epoch, repression? Let me not become a heretic, murmured Sepilian. I must not. On reflection, he erased this last entry. During Sepilian's career, he had encountered situations sufficient enough to persuade him of the Emperor's wisdom. He had been party to enough acts of harshness, had been the initiator of such deeds of necessary savagery, most recently at Valhall II, where enslavers had been invading in from the warp and instigating a fierce insurrection against the Imperium. The universe, he told his Darium, is cruel, savage, unforgiving. A battleground. And the darkest enemies hide in the warp like tigers ready to pounce on a human herd. If one of that herd attracts the notice of the tiger, the rest of the herd may be ravaged, or worse, possessed and twisted obscenely into evil. Was not Sepilian himself thus forced to act like a beast, presiding over atrocities in the service of a tyrant? Sepilian did not exactly pride himself on his independence of thought. He rather regretted such intrusions of doubt. Still and all, these qualities produced a certain flexibility and ingenuity, thus best serving the cause of the Emperor and of the human race. His attire reflected that independent demeanour. He wore a long kilt of silver fur, an iridescent cuirass suggestive of a shell of a giant exotic beetle, and a blood-red cloak with high collar. On both forefingers he wore rare Jokero digital weapons, one of those a miniaturized needler, the other a tiny las pistol. Orthodox guns were always secreted around his person. Amulets jangled around his neck, making music as he moved. Sepilian was tall, dark, and lean. His drooping black moustache resembled some insect's mandibles. On his right cheek was the tattoo of an ever-watchful eye. Long before the cabin door opened to admit Commander Hatchet, Sepilian expected his arrival. The Inquisitor was a powerful sensor of presence. He knew where everybody was within a generous radius. An unusual offshoot of this sense allowed him to anticipate intrusions from the warp, which is why the human loyalty had come to the Delta Comini solar system. Shortly after leaving Valhall 2, Sepilian had dreamed of a sickly, sweet, coaxing voice that was neither man nor woman's, cajoling a bright young mind far away, and that young mind was special, in a way that the young Sepilian's mind had been special, only more so, much more so. Thus, even over the light years and through the immeasurable fluctuating currents of warp sea, Sepilian heard something that resonated with his own psyche, that had plucked at his instincts, as if threads of dark destiny bound him directly and direly to that mind and to that eerie, seductive voice. A casting of the rune bones by Sepilian in tandem with a tarot divination performed by the ship's navigator had indicated the blue star that was the fourth brightest in the constellation. "We are in orbit around the parent planet," Hatchet reported respectively, with only the merest hint of reproach, which he would hardly dare voice. "I thought it diplomatic not to order our captain to orbit the moon itself till I had presented our compliments by Comnet to the governor." Scar tissue on Hatchet's chin stood out whitely, as though he had been punched. His cheek tattoo was that of a skull skewered by a dagger. His teeth were painted black as a signal that any smile of his was dark. A vermilion badge of nobility, a stylized power axe, adorned his right knee modestly, so that whenever bending to the Emperor's image during devotions, he would kneel upon this heraldic honour. His gloved hand strayed to the imperial eagle emblazoned in purple on his lavender dress cuirass, as if to emphasize his unquestioning loyalty. Sepilian knew that the commander would rather have returned to the Griefbringer's base after the actions on Valhall 2 in order to take their dead home and renew their strength. Even Griefbringer Marines had been hard put to quash the enslaver disorder. Losses had been heavy. Only 3 platoons of the warriors remained. Perhaps the Valhall mission should best have been entrusted to one of the redoubtable Terminator teams, but none had been available. Truly, the resources of the Imperium were stretched thin. En route to Delta Comini, during a refueling stopover at a high-gravity world, Sepilian had commandeered the services of 2 platoons of Ogren Giants as a fighting supplement, also of a lone mechanically minded squat, for the Griefbringers had lost their master technician on Valhall 2. It was an uneasy mixture. "Yes, that's sensible, Commander," said the Inquisitor. "And have you presented my compliments yet?" Thus did Sepilian emphasize his personal authority at a time when he nevertheless felt beset by doubts. "That I have, my Lord Inquisitor. Governor Velicott felt obliged to mention that he maintains adequate planetary forces in case of alien attack, and that preachers on that moon root out any psychers fiercely. Would you describe him as an independent-minded governor?" "Not obstructively so. We are welcome to land and investigate." "Just as well for him. He suggested that we wouldn't need too many Marines to cope with a moonful of farmers, when there isn't any obvious threat. Civilian snorted. The level of threat is for me to decide. The worst threat is often the threat that hides itself. The governor suggested, most politely, that you understand, that it might be beneath our dignity to blow human rabbits to pieces. I wonder if he has any inkling that our strength is depleted. Perhaps his court astropath somehow eavesdropped on ours, though I rather doubt it. I suspect he has some guilty reason to fear for his dynasty, such as irregularities in imperial taxes. The Velicots control the finest Grox meat farms in this celestial segment. Much of the meat and other produce goes to Delta Comini too. That's a barren mining world, producing rare metals for our Imperium. Perhaps there are secret financial agreements, which are none of our concern. I implied as much, without saying so. A Marine commander needs many skills, does he not? I thank you, my Lord Inquisitor. Civilian felt obliged to ask. How goes morale? For the Griefbringers had also lost their Marine chaplain in action. Hatchet hesitated. Be frank. I will not be offended. The Ogrins, they stink. Civilian attempted a injection of humour. They are famous for stinking. If one cannot tolerate some body odour, how can one bear the stench of scorching flesh in combat? My men will fight alongside the Abhumans, with honour, but they don't like it much, having to share a ship with those stenches. I suppose, my Lord Inquisitor, you insisted on pressing the Ogrins into service because, being Abhuman, and frankly thuggish, they are much more expendable. Civilian winced momentarily. What Hatchet implied was perilously close to the unthinkable impertinence. Yet Civilian had invited the commander to be outspoken, had he not? The loss of so many brave fighters in the early action, however justifiable, was a slight blot on the Inquisitor's personal honour. Marines would willingly sacrifice their lives, but they were not, however, suicide berserkers. To replace them with expendable Abhumans somehow smeared the pride of the Griefbringers, amounting almost to an error of judgment on Civilian's part. One did not polish a fine sword with mud, nor repair a broken one with wood. Muttering a brief prayer, Civilian unclipped a pouch from his belt. Breathing deeply and slowly, to induce a light trance, he cast his rune bones upon a desk of polished black wood. Those finger and toe bones, minutely inscribed with conjurations, had belonged to a rogue psycho mage who the Inquisition had executed 5 centuries earlier. Now, these relics served Civilian's psychic sense. They were a useful channel for his talent, his focus. As he concentrated, the pattern of white bones against the black swam until a foggy picture formed, visible to him and him alone. What do you see? Whispered Hatchet. The thought drifted through Civilian's mind, like some seductive siren song, that it wasn't totally unknown for an Inquisitor to sicken of his harsh duties, to flee to some lost world, some primitive pastoral planet or other. Not one such as this moon, certainly. The Inquisitor resumed his breathing routine. I see a strappily comely boy. Though his face isn't clear, I see the circle of a portal opening from the warp, and coming through it is abomination. What species of abomination? Enslavers again? A sensible question. The warp entities known as enslavers could open a gateway through the very flesh of a vulnerable psyker and spill out, to do as their name suggested. Civilian shook his head. The boy's been given an aura of protection to hide him. He's somewhere within 100 or so kilometers of the capital city. He's becoming a powerful psychic receiver. Other psychic talents are sprouting in him first. I think he's about to be possessed, unless we reach him first. To capture him or destroy him? I fear his potential power. One day, perhaps, and Civilian sketched a pious subsidence. He might be a little like the Emperor himself. Just a little. Not a new Horus, surely. What loathing crept into the commander's voice as he uttered the name of the corrupted betrayer, the rebel battlemaster who had betrayed the Imperium and besmirched the honor of so many Marine chapters so long ago. If that's the situation, maybe the relevant quadrant of the moon should be sterilized, although that would include Urpol, the spaceport, many Grox farms. Delta Comini 2 would starve as a consequence, and the moon has orbital defenses as well as surface troops who would fight us. They wouldn't have much battle experience. I think we could do it, perhaps with our last drop of blood. Let us pray it doesn't come to that, Hatchet, although your zeal is commendable. What is finer than death in battle to defend the future of mankind? If we are in time, this boy must needs be a gift to our Emperor for his own divine wisdom to judge. Let us head for that moon as soon as our present orbit permits.
Sir Pillion uttered a silent prayer that his inner eyesight might pierce the veil that now partially hid the boy.
Think of the circle, crooned the mouth within Jomi's head. It grows larger, does it not?
The boy watched a floater of grox meat depart from Pushik Farm. The engine and cargo section was splattered with mystic runes to help hold the vehicle in the air and encourage the robot brain to find its way to the city. Those runes had recently been repainted. If runes faded or flaked off the hull, the floater may stray from its course, or its chiller unit may fail. Clouds of flies buzzed around a couple of sledges on which piles of scaly hides, some barrels of blood, sacks of bones were setting out for the much shorter journey to Groxgeld, there to be rendered into glue and sausages and crude armor. Whips cracked and sliced through the aerial vermin to tickle draft horses into action. The runners creaked across stones worn smooth by centuries of such local transport. No, thought Jomi. The floater would only break down if it hadn't been serviced properly. The meat transporter was only a machine, a thing of metal and wires and crystals, based on ancient science from the dark age of technology. Courtesy of the voice, Jomi now knew that former ages had existed, unimaginable stretches of time unimaginably long ago. The current age was a time of superstition, so the voice had said. An earlier age had been a time of enlightenment, yet that bygone era was now called dark to the extent that so much had been forgotten about it, so the voice assured him, confusingly. He mustn't worry his pretty mind overmuch about foul demons such as Preacher Farb pratted about. True, such things existed, to a certain extent, but enlightenment was the route to joy. The owner of the voice said that it had been captured by the storms of warp space long ago, doomed to wander in strange domains for eons, until finally it sensed a dawning psychic talent that was particularly attuned to it. You aren't a witch, dearest boy, the boy had assured him. You're a psyker. Say after me, I'm a psyker with a glorious mind that deserves to relish all manner of gratifications, which I, your only true friend, will teach you how to attain. Say to yourself, I'm the most illustrious of psychers, and remember to think of the circle, won't you? The owner of the voice would come to Jomi. It would save him from the entrail shed. It would save him from the crushing embrace of fat Galandra Pushik, and from the terror of the wheel. Soon, cooed the voice, like the coolest of evening breezes. Always think of the circle, like a wheel rolling over close to you, but not a wheel to fear. Why have we been taught to fear wheels? An inspiration assaulted Jomi. Surely our sledges would run more easily if we used a wheel on each corner, 4 wheels which turn around as the sledge advances. Then it would be called a wagon. You're such a bright lad, Jomi. Bright in so many ways. All of a sudden, the voice grew sour and petulant. And here comes spurious brightness to cheer you. Gritchy! Her slim limbs, mainly hidden by a coarse cotton frock, yet imaginable as fair and smooth, her chestnut hair hanging in ringlets, veiling a slender neck, the huge straw hat shading that creamy complexion, the teasing eyes of a blue so much less daunting than the sun. How could such perfection have issued from Galandra Pushik's hips? Gretchen twirled her pink parasol.
Did he gulp? "Whatever are you thinking, Jomi Jabal?" she asked, as if inviting him to flatter her, to excite her. He swallowed. He muttered the truth. "About science." Gretchen pouted. "Would that be the art of sighing for a girl, perhaps? Fine lords will sigh for me in Urpel some day soon, believe me." Could he possibly tell her his secret? Surely she wouldn't betray him. "Gretchen, if it was possible for you to go much further away than Urpel." "Where's further away than Urpel? Urpel's the centre of everything hereabouts." "Would you go? Surely you don't mean up to some farm in the furthest hinterland?" She wrinkled up her nose. "Surrounded by muties, no doubt." He pointed at the sky. "No, much further away. To the stars and to other worlds." She laughed at him, though not entirely with derision. Perhaps this good-looking youth could tickle her fancy in unexpected ways. Should he whisper in her ear, arranging to meet after work to hear his secret?
"Remember the cruel wheel, Johnny,"
warned the voice. "When you come, voice, can I take Gretchen with me?" Did he hear a faint stifled snarl in the depths of his mind? Gretchen simpered. "Are you pretending to ignore me now? Are your feelings hurt? What do you know of feelings?" The memory suddenly came to him of Gretchen's mother, feeling Jomi assiduously in her fetid imagination, exploring and squeezing him, and out of the corner of his eye he noticed Yolanda Pushlik glaring from the veranda of the farmhouse. Gretchen must have spied her mother too, for she promptly flounced away, turning up her nose as if at some foul reek.
"Ha!
Grim, the tough, stocky, red-bearded dwarf said to himself.
Ha! Indeed. A world that bans wheels. Strange in many other worlds."
The squat pushed his forage cap back to scratch his bald head, which was scarred from a battle wound on Vahal. As a result of this injury, his skull had been shaved clean, and he was trying out baldness as a style. Fewer nesting places for lice, at least. Now he would be compelled to leave his beloved trike, mounted with twin cannon, in the hold of the Imperial ship. Grim scanned the cavernous plasteel dormitory through his dark shades. Imperial icons gleamed, each lit by a glow globe, sharing wall space with cruder battle fetishes of the giants, one of which was draped respectively with a ram's intestines from the arrival feast the night before. Scraps of meat, hair, broken bones littered the floor, mashed into the semblance of a brown and grey carpet on which assorted insectoid vermin grazed, or at least lay crushed upon it. The dormitories had ceased to reek. It had transcended stench, attaining a new plane of fetor, as though the air had transmuted. Stinks did not usually perturb Grim, but he wore nostril filters.
"Huh!"
The Ogrin, Thunderjug Agros, quit sharpening his yellow tusks on a rasp.
"Wash Meritich."
Sergeant Ogrin Agrox was a bonehead who had undergone biochemical Ogrin neural enhancement. Thus he was capable of a degree of sophisticated conversation. He could also be trusted with a ripper gun, too. Grim, natty in his green overalls and quilted red flak jacket, surveyed the crudely tattooed Megaman in his coarse cloth and chainmail. Several battle badges were riveted to the giant's thick skull.
"I suppose," said Grim, "being forced to walk or ride draft horses keeps the peasant in their places, don't it?" "Some use floaters, though," objected Thunderjug. "Ah, well, you need to hurry fresh meat to the spaceport and up into orbit to be void frozen. In my not-so-humble opinion, banning wheels is going a bit over the top. I like wheels."
Especially the wheels of his battle trike.
"I guess in this neck of the galaxy the wheel represents the godless science of the Dark Age."
In common with all squats, Grim was an instinctive technician. Watching Imperial technicians sketch hexes against malfunction among the rune-painted machinery here and there, and listening to them utter incantations to an engine disturbed him mildly. In a sense, his own race were in a direct line of descent from the obscure ancient days of science, where warp storms had cut the squattish mining worlds off to evolve independently.
"Oh, my sainted ancestors,"
he thought. Still, everybody to their own religion. Most of these thoughts were too complicated to convey even to a bonehead. The giant plucked a thumb-sized louse from his armpit and crunched the grey parasite between his teeth. Just then, Ogren voices bellowed. 2 warriors had bared their tusks. Seizing mace and axe respectively, they began to hack at each other's chainmail in a bellicose competition. Spectators roared wagers in favour of one combatant or the other, or both, stamping their great feet so that the steel dormitory rocked and groaned. Thunderjug lowered his head and charged along the dormitory. He butted left, he butted right with his steel-plated skull. The quarrellers resisted, butting back at their sergeant, although not disrespectful enough to raise axe or mace against him. Finally, Thunderjug seized the 2 by the neck and crashed their heads together in the manner of 2 wrecking balls, till the fighters subsided and agreed to behave.
"Shut up, all!"
After issuing that command, Thunderjug ambled back, spat out a broken tooth, and grinned.
"Gotta keep order, don't I?"
Grim removed his fingers from his ears and combed some mites from his beard. Would he have been happier billeted with the true human grief-bringers? Undoubtedly more comfortable, less liable to be squashed by a reeling heavyweight. On the other hand, he had come to count on Thunderjug as something of a friend, a brainy bull among this herd of buffalo. Grim prided himself on mixing with all sorts and conditions. He hadn't had too much experience of Imperial Marines. There weren't that many in the galaxy. They seemed a shade cliquish. Exemplary fellows, needless to say, but so devoutly dedicated to the traditions of their chapters. A roving squad who only gave nodding acquiescence to the worship of the Emperor saw the universe from a slightly different angle. From whichever angle, the galaxy was a fairly menacing place to be, a sprawl of mayhem. Grim decided to strip and clean his bolt gun, though without bothering to pray to it.
"You were born under warped stars, Jomi," sighed the voice. "Once, the warp merely seemed to be a zone through which our ships flew faster than light. Oh, we were innocent then, in spite of all our science. Naive and callow as lambs, such as your sweet self."
Jomi shifted uneasily. Of late, a cloying stickiness had begun to creep into the accents of the voice at times. As if his informant realized this, its tone grew crisper. "But then, all over the galaxy we had guilelessly populated. Psychers such as yourself began to be born." "So there weren't always psychers around?"
"By no means to such an extent, no. When the powers and predators of chaos took heed to those bright beacons, they spilled into reality to ravage and warp the worlds. Those powers are what Preacher Farb calls demons, as it were."
"Then he's right in that respect. You said I shouldn't worry my head about demons."
"Your sweet head, your pussant mind."
From the low, scrubby hillside, Jomi stared towards the huddle of Groxgelt. At this hour, the south pole of the gas giant seemed to almost rest upon the headman's mansion and the Imperial cult temple, as though that golden ball would crush and melt the biggest building that Jomi knew. The sun's blue radiance ached. Due to a trick of the light and wispy clouds, a bilious green miasma, the colour of nausea, seemed to drip from one limb of the hostile parent world upon the town. A scrack flew overhead, seeking little lizards to dive upon, and Jomi sat very still till the unpleasant avian discharged a tiny bomb of acidic excitement somewhere.
"Oh, comely youth, guard your skin," said the voice, which could spy through his eyes now.
"Does chaos make our son breed wens and carbuncles in our flesh?" Jomi asked.
"Oh, no. Your son is rich in rays beyond violet. You've been fortunate to resist those rays yourself. You'll be even luckier when I reach you."
"How does Gretchen know to wear a white hat and carry a parasol?"
"Vanity."
"Does she have an extra sense to tell her?"
"If so, she needs it. In other respects, she appears senselessly empty-headed."
"How can you say so? She's so beautiful."
"And presently she will sell what you call beauty. But only as a minion and a toy, only until she withers."
"Beauty must mean something," protested Jomi. "I mean, I'm fair, and I'm a psyker. Isn't there any connection there, voice?" From far away, Jomi seemed to hear a stifled cackle of laughter.
"So you subscribe to the theory that the body and soul reflect one another?"
Heavy irony coloured the reply. In a dark sense, that's often true. Should chaos seize a victim, then that victim's body will twist and warp, if body there be. How can a person not have a body? Maybe one day you'll learn how the spirit can soar free from the flesh. Was the voice telling him the truth? And how could that be the road to ecstasy, whatever ecstasy really signified? As if agitated, the voice began to ramble. I was one of the earliest psychers back in the epoch where true science gave way to strife and anarchy. Oh, the madness, the madness. I was marooned. Our ship malfunctioned. It died in the warp. All through the dark aeons since, I've heard the whisperings of telepaths from the real. I've eavesdropped on the downfall of civilizations and on its grim and terrible ignorant revival. I could never escape. I lacked a beacon that cast a suitable light. How long do aeons last? Jomi still had very little idea. For a period there was silence, and then the voice answered vaguely. Time behaves differently within the warp. Has your body been warped at all? Asked Jomi. Again that distant cackle. My body, the voice repeated flatly. My body. It said no more than that. Phantom gangrene dribbled from the gas giant. Serpillion prayed, In nomine imperiatus, guide us to the golden boy that we may imprison him, or render him unto you as you wish. Imperiator, guard our armor and our gaze, lubricate our projectile weapons so they do not jam, bless and brighten the beams of our lasers, fiat lux in tenebrae. And cleanse my vision too, he thought. Pierce that aura of protection which cloaks the boy, and tear away any cataract of doubt. The depleted ranks of the Griefbringers knelt cumbersomely in their bulging burnished insignia blazoned power armor, which was mostly a sickly pea green with engrailed chevrons of headachy purple. Visors raised, they gazed intently at the Inquisitor who wore borrowed vestments of the slain chaplain. Green chasuble, purple apron filigreed with the emblem of the chapter. The long mauve stole, dangling from Serpillion's neck to his knees, was embroidered with aliens in torment. Amulets and icons chinked and clinked. I have decided I will bless our Ogryn warriors too, Serpillion murmured to Hatchet, who knelt beside him. Ogryns are men too, after a fashion. A blessing does not depend on the receiver, but on the giver. Does a las pistol possess a brain, Commander? A spirit, yes, but a thinking brain. Ogryns have spirits. At this sacred moment did he condone his decision to dilute the strong wine of the Marines with the crude ale of the barbarian giants. Serpillion could guess what the commander might be thinking. Not on my ship they don't have spirits. A few bucketfuls to drink and this place would be wrecked. Or maybe this was only Serpillion's own guilt speaking to him, that he, a survivor, should be wearing the vestments of a chaplain who had fought the enslavers so fiercely. The assembled Griefbringers' eyes shone with pious dedication. All this to hunt for one boy. Serpillion's instinct still told him that this mission mattered deeply, if only his vision was clearer. The very veiling of his insight suggested that he and the Marines faced a powerful adversary and might win a great reward. To Hatchet he whispered, Ogryn's Marines must be one body under your command. The former are not simply battering rams. If I do not bless them, we all fail in reverence. Would the Griefbringers' slain chaplain have blessed the loyal stout stenches too? Benedictio, Serpillion cried out loudly. Benedictions triumphius. Let your watchword for this mission be, Emperor of all. Emperor of all, the Griefbringers chorused in response. As Serpillion quit the assembly area, he vowed to redouble his exertions to sense the ambiguous presence of the boy. His rune bones continued to thwart him, almost as if in conspiracy with the power that was aiming itself at the boy, almost though those bones were enacting a 500-year delayed vengeance upon the Inquisition that had stripped the flesh from them. Very well. He must dispense with their aid. He must use sheer mental discipline. He must attempt to put himself into the boy's frame of thought, for there was a link of destiny between himself and his quarry, was there not? He must detect the boy by that ploy. He must forget all that he himself knew of the Imperium. He must erase all that he knew of the arcane wisdom of the Inquisition, garnered over millennia of terrible experiences and steadfast purity, and in Sepilion's case, some decades of duty. He must imagine himself born on a farming world. He must visualize his brain coming into bloom with bizarre petals, unseen by his fellow peasants, petals that served as esoteric psychic radar dishes with unfurling stamens, acting as the antennae of the mind, each of these tipped with a pollen that must prove itself tasty to demon or predator. He must not ask himself, where precisely is this flower growing? Instead, he must ask, how is this flower feeling right now? He must identify with what he would pluck and present to the Emperor. He must imitate his prey. By that expedient, he might dispel the psychic mist. Why, if he concentrated sufficiently well on pretending to be such a boy, he might distract whatever malign force was homing in, as though a heat-seeking missile were presented with a glowing decoy. But first, Sepilion had paused deep in thought through a corridor braced with mighty ribs and muscled with power cables. He strode onward towards the Ogren dormitory. He ignored the stink, which was really no worse than the odour of many burst bowels, as he told himself. He disregarded the vermin underfoot, which were really akin to diminutive, edible pets. "Benedictio, homes gigantis," he cried out. "Shut up, Ogrens," bellowed the bonehead sergeant, snapping to attention. As Sepilion rattled through his litany of blessings and invocations, all he received from the bulk of his congregation by means of responses were grunts and belches. These noises might nonetheless be signs of Ogren piety. The lone Scot technician, clasping forage cat in hands politely, grinned sympathetically and zanily, as if that little man felt some particular affinity for Inquisitors. The engines of human loyalty were at last beginning to whine and wail. The cruiser was descending through the moon's atmosphere. Concluding with a final resounding Imperiata Benedictio, Sepilion fled to his cabin and stripped off those chaplain's vestments. Activating the view screen with its wrought iron frame of death's head skulls and scorpions, he stared at the flickering, swelling vista of Urpal City below. The spaceport was of flat, grey metal pitted with blast pads. Spires sprouted like thickly waxed hairs. Suburbs were stubble. Roads were wrinkles zigzagging away to the sallow, lumpy skin of the landscape. A snaking blue vein was a river, a lake was a hemorrhage, farms were bruises. He knelt and thought, I am a strange flower growing somewhere in that land. My lurid secret petals are ears to hear voices on psychic winds. My pollen smells beautiful to parasites. He too had been a strange flower, had he not? Born into the upper tiers of the hive city of Magnox on Debolia 5, young Torque had been torn between a taste for learning and a sensual nature. Both, of course, were facets of the search for new experiences. Yet whereas a youth who seeks solely for madder music, stronger wine, stranger drugs, wilder girls, or for the thrill of danger may presently become a poet or a master criminal or some such deviant, he is much more likely to burn out, to run his adolescent course, and settle thereafter into a self-indulging conformity, may develop a useful, even brilliant, drudge. Put the two together in one skin, though. Torque's father was the chamberlain to one of the noble houses of Magnox, so naturally, so soon after puberty, Torque joined one of the fashionable and privileged brat gangs, who rampaged and rousted in the latest glitter-garb costumes, sporting black codpieces, grotesque jewellery, and plumed helmets fitted with crash music earphones, who wounded and slew with power stilettos, which would spring a lake of vibrating, searing energy into the guts of a rival. One night, during a raid on the lower tech levels of Magnox, Torque sensed for the first time the presence of an ambush. A glowing, multi-dimensional map of human life signs swam within his head, shot through with static, needed tuning. Subsequently, in that mysterious, multivalent map, he was to sense the eerie mauve glow of intrusions from the warp. He led the Brat gang against a nest of psychers. These psychers were on the verge of being possessed by demons. A rival gang was protecting them, and were making them a playful erotic cult. Had Torque's gang discovered these psychers first, events might have fallen out otherwise. Avid for thrills, the gilded youths from the upper tier may have made gang mascots of the psychers. Torque might have become a coven leader. Eventually, pursued by fevered witchfinders, he might have been forced to flee among the scum of the Undercity.
Yet events did not fall out in this fashion. Furthermore, Torque had studied, and he knew the lineaments of the Imperium rather better than his fellow brats. He thought he understood the strength of its muscles and the way that those muscles pulled. His gang bested the patrons of the Psykers and those who had been pampered and abused by turns. Along with those captured playthings, he presented himself to the Imperium as a would-be Inquisitor, whereby he would enjoy the wildest experiences within a learned framework. He hadn't by any means relished all of his experiences. Sometimes he was dogged by doubt that he was betraying kin of his mind, albeit out of a dire necessity that became increasingly clear to him during his years of training. Piety had become his prophylactic against twinges of remorse. Faith was his pain-soothing pill, his vindication. Torque, still dressed as a dandy, one devoted to terrible duties, and his superiors had smiled, in their thin, astringent way, at such an evidence of honourable excess. "I am a flower. I am a flower," he droned, breathing in trance rhythm. Torque had been something of an orchid to begin with, whereas the boy he sought was a wonderful weed infesting some fly-blown farm. Could he identify? A mauve glow polluted his inner map every which way, refusing to condense into a single signalling spot. That glow masked the brash young hues of the flower. A fortified palace stabbed upwards, tilted by the angle of the ship's approach. Towers, spiked domes, laser batteries, other chateaux within walled gardens drifted by, factories, abattoirs, then a plain of ferroconcrete loomed. Human loyalties settled. The familiar throb of engines faded. A klaxon shrieked twice to signal the shutting down of artificial gravity. As the natural pull of the moon, which was a good 20% weaker, replaced the general gravity, so the ship creaked. The cruiser was at once relaxing and bearing down. An Inquisitor must bear down firmly without such inner relaxation. The gravity of this mission was, perhaps, extreme.
"I'm really deeply honoured," stammered Reverend Henrik Farb. "I've never set eyes on a Space Marine before, let alone met a commander."
Why should he have? If the Imperium comprised 1,000,000 worlds, why, there were only 1,000,000 Marines, too. Musky incense snaked inside the cavernous temple, wreathing icons and writing curlicues upon the air in what might have been the mad script of aliens. Farb, sweating, sucked in tendrils of smoke like an asthmatic seeking soothing vapours to stop a panic-stricken attack of suffocation. Candles flickered, contributing their own fainter odour of reptile grease. This man, who had presumably terrified so many others, was terrified himself.
"Your respect honours our Emperor," said Hatchet. "So does your dread. But now you must think clearly."
The Inquisitor had finally narrowed the likely area of search to a quadrant north of Urpol City. The land raiders that survived after Valhalla II had sped forth on their cleated armoured tracks to the various towns in this zone, crushing the primitive roads, carrying the Marines and Ogryns. And so it happened that Hatchet himself had come to this town of Groxgelt. If there were to be action, he wished to be as close as possible, not back at the ship, awaiting reports. How could he put this worthy preacher at his ease?
"Tell me," he asked lightly, "does the Gelt in Groxgelt revert to cash or to castration?"
Farb stared at his questioner as if he was being posed a riddle upon which his life depended. Could it be, wondered Hatchet, that the preacher didn't understand all of the words? The man spoke decent Imperial Gothic. The dialect used on this moon was quite comprehensible.
"Never mind, preacher. Tell me, what lad in this community stands out in any way as different?"
Farb's gaze dropped to the Grief-bringer's protruding groin guard, a vergry-smeared skull transfixed by a purple dagger.
"Castration, I think," he mumbled. "Concentrate," snapped Hatchet. Yes, there's one boy, never calls to any bother, prays in the temple here, good worker, so I hear. Pretends witch breakings, though they seem to make him squirm. Son of the Tanner and Jabal. The boy has no visible deformities, that's the old thing about him. He looks," the preacher spat, "pure. Lately he's been going places alone, I hear."
"How did you come by this information?" The wife of the farmer who employs him. Well, I cherish certain feelings for the woman between you and me, as man to man. Hatchard forbore to sneer at this attempted comparison. Nothing illicit on my part, sir. She's a woman of substance, if you take my meaning. Perhaps if her husband is ever gored by a grox. What of the boy? Why, Galandra Pushik keeps her eye on him, as a good employer should. The boy speaks differently. His tone seems less local. He uses the odd word she does not understand. As the Griefbringer strode back to the Land Raider after interrogating the terrified Tanner and the hulking, stupid son, Big Ven, he eyed the Ogren Bonehead and the squat sitting on the uppermost track of the vehicle. Zigzags of pea green and purple blotched the plasteel body and track walls, mounted with las cannon ball turrets of the Raider, less suggestive of camouflage than of a sickly infestation by some poisonous lichen. A cowed crowd of townsfolk were eyeing those who perched high above the massive vehicle. The sprocketed wheels that moved the tracks were hidden from their superstitious gaze by the casings of armour. For his men to have mixed with these scratching, farting, dim-witted, sweating peasants, to try to tease some sense out of backyard gossip after the costly victory over the enslavers, a perilous task that had almost proved beyond the Griefbringer's reach, this present mission seemed almost designed as an insult, a reproof for losing so many comrades, however gloriously. No, thought Hatchard, that way lies heresy. I must trust the instincts of an Inquisitor. At least the fat preacher had understood well enough the power that Hatchard and his men deployed, and the seriousness of the threat to humanity that must have brought such warriors here. Hatchard was fairly sure that he had located the prey they sought, whilst the Inquisitor remained unable to pinpoint him. The commander permitted himself a slight black-toothed smile, one of grim satisfaction. His return to the market square triggered a flurry in the gulping fearful and stupidly resentful crowd. Yet most gazes flicked quickly back to the crudely clad Ogren and the squat atop the vehicle. Did that passive mob of ugly specimens view the Bonehead as more intimidating than an armoured marine? Or, in their squinty eyes, was the grotesque, giant man someone who they could more easily relate? Hatchard entered the hatch of the personal den where the tech crew and other marines waited. The comnet crackled alive as he fingered the rune knobs, its spirit kindling faithfully. "Lord Inquisitor," he reported. "Have identified a possible suspect. Name of Jomi Jabal. Curfew approaches, but the boy has not returned home. Believed to be out by farm 4 clicks northwest of Groxgelt town." One boy. Against whom? Land Raiders, las cannons, armoured Griefbringers, and Ogrins. One boy. Plus what else? "I'm within 20 clicks of you, Commander. I'm on my way. Don't let the noise of the Land Raiders alert our target. Advance the final 4 clicks on foot." Understood. Hatchard switched to battle code to summon the other Land Raiders to speed across the country to meet outside Groxgelt. He would have to wait a while, so he stepped outside. The setting gas giant peered over rooftops like the disembodied eye of some enormous, cosmic parent creature, which was slowly withdrawing its witness from this world, as though to allow a cloak of gloom to descend. "Do I wish I had my trike with me," the squat remarked conversationally from up top. "Big battle machines attract missiles and such. Zippy little trikes, avoid 'em." Hatchard recalled the dwarf's name. Grim, that was it. "Land Raiders protect little men like you," Hatchard said, coldly. Dunno about this one. Armor's cracked, needs welding." "You're supposed to be our technician. Paint another rune, utter a charm." Grim sniggered briefly, and anger flared in Hatchard at a time where he should be composing himself for battle. "Wretched abhuman." Sensing danger, Grim gabbled. "Apologies, sir. Had me work cut out service in the suits." "Silence. In any case, we will be advancing on foot to begin with, and that includes you, little man." Grim goggled at the commander's power armor, slapped his own quilted flak jacket by way of comparison, and muttered, "Oh, my ancestors." Thunderjug guffawed like distant thunder. "Soon," the voice soothed Jomi. "Welcome the circle into your mind." The voice had told him where to wait, by the biggest Grok's padlock. Jomi glanced anxiously at the sinking gas giant. Already the last of the gloaming was upon the countryside. Soon the curfew trumpet would scream out in town, and no one human would be abroad but himself. He would have broken the law. If the owner of the voice did not come, what could Jomi do? Hide until morning? What, here, where the mutants might roam? If the mutants did not enter the town itself, they may well haunt the open countryside. Yet he was a mutant too. Why would other mutants be hostile to one of their own kind? But outcasts would surely be hungry. Jomi's flesh may smell sweet. Sweet flesh reminded him of Gretchy. If nothing else happened tonight, he could stumble to the farmhouse. He might be able to climb to an upper window, Gretchy's, tap for admittance. Surely she would admire his daring for venturing out at night to see her. Surely she would reward him suitably. Surely she... The circle! Think of the circle, or I may lose focus. He thought of Gretchy's mouth open wide. He thought of another part of her opening to him, a soft ring, whose exact shape and dimensions he wasn't quite sure. Forget that foolish minx. She's worthless. I can let you glimpse such lust nymphs that would make her seem trite and dowdy. I can conjure courtesans from memory. Such a pain of anguish and frustration seemed to afflict the voice. Glimpsing and conjuring, the voice had promised to introduce Jomi to delights, not merely show him, as if spied through a window of thick glass. You'll be broken on the wheel if I don't reach you, the voice threatened. The wheel. Jomi jerked back to reality. What else was his whole life in this damned moon but wretchedness, entrails and heat and fear and Galandra Pushik's lusts which he would insist on satisfying one day soon, crushingly and disgustingly. He was about to leave all this vileness behind. Don't think of Gretchy again until after the owner of the voice arrives. He forced her image from his mind. Wheel, circle, circle, wheel. In the last golden light, the horned, scaly, toothsome reptiles milled sluggishly in their corral. Each was the size of a small pony. Their claws clicked on stony ground. Cropland dipped away towards the river. Boulders, some the size of houses, punctuated the ridged oat fields. Carried here by sheets of ice long ago, the voice had told him. He inhaled. He thought he heard whispers on the wind. He sensed minds, disciplined minds, almost completely shielded from him as if a fire screen stood in front of a blaze of grokstun. Yet some of the heat glowed through. Could witches who were far cleverer than himself be creeping towards this place, attracted by the voice? No witches who had ever been broken in the square had ever seemed particularly clever. Of course, extreme pain reduced them to imbecility, to shattered bags of white-hot, shrieking nerves, and little more than that. Could they ever have been so clever to be captured? Compared to those witches, Jomi had become educated. Somewhat. Maybe really clever witches had escaped and banded together in the furthest hinterlands away from the farms and towns. Jomi could also sense other minds nearby that were dull and slow and fierce. Was he hearing the thoughts of Groxon too? Surely not. Voice? He questioned. Hush, bonny boy, I must concentrate. Oh, it has been so long. Soon, soon. Strive to see the circle in front of you. He mustn't fail the voice at the last moment, for thus he would fail himself. Nor must he scare it away by hinting at the presence of those other strange, strong minds in the vicinity. Those, and the brutish minds. Obediently he imagined a circle, and strained his eyes in the dimming light. Yes! A glowing hoop appeared, balanced upon the ground a few 100 meters away. Slowly it swelled in size, though it did not brighten. If anything, it grew dimmer, as though to evade scrutiny from elsewhere. Within the hoop was utter night, a darkness absolute. The fact that the portal was coming to existence some distance away from the boy, and slowly, intended to rule out the activity of a warp creature such as an enslaver. Warp creatures of that ilk were usually impetuous in their attack. Nor could the alien Eldar be creating this opening. The Eldar were masters of the warp gates and such. They hardly needed the type of psychic focus that the boy seemed to be providing. As though anything on this moon could be possibly interesting to an Eldar. The portal was opening, and almost painfully, if such a thing could be. Almost creakingly, as if its hinges had rusted through long eons of time. Obviously a warp portal didn't have hinges, but the analogy held. Grief bringers in power armor were spreading out under the cover of the boulders. The gang of Ogrins were lumbering into position in the almost darkness. "If we seize the Psycho Boy now," began Hatchard, "we may scare whatever is coming. We must wait until the portal maker steps through. We hunt for knowledge as well as prey." "Knowledge?" Did the commander shudder? "In the Dark Age," he murmured, "they sought knowledge for its own sake." Serpillion said sharply, "Only the Emperor knows what really happened during the Dark Age." How the Inquisitor wished he knew too. Godless science had flourished back then. From time to time remnants were still found, precious arcane techniques and equipment of utmost value to the Imperium. Long ago, the human race had spread throughout the galaxy like a migration of lemmings, heedless to the beings lurking in the warp, for it was heedless to its own psychic potential. Innocence. Innocence. Puppies in a demon's den. Like a sudden storm, insanity and anarchy had erupted till the God Emperor arose to save and unify, to control the human worlds, to calm the psychic tempest with utmost and essential rigor. Here was a boy of the possible future to be. Here was... what else? Serpillion extended his sense of presence. Distortions dazed his vision. A robot higher than any building in Groxgelt. A robot that bristled with what Jomi took to be weapons, lurched through the gate of darkness. "Here I am, dearest boy," exulted the voice in Jomi's brain. "Don't fear this metal body. This is the shell that has sheltered the kernel of myself as I drifted alone for eons in the warp, in a derelict megaship. Now at last I can touch the soil of a world. Now I can hope to be a fleshy body once more. Oh, the sweet endearing flesh, the senses that sing, the nerves that twang like harp strings. What song did they sing so long ago? Soon, I will remember." The robot took a tentative step towards Jomi. As if exercising limbs which hadn't encountered the pull of gravity for many millennia, the robot swept an arm around. Energies crackled from the tips of its steel fingers, gusting across the herd of Groxen. The reptiles began to snort and hiss and rip at the soil of their compound, and butt their horns against the fence. What fleshy body was the kernel of this huge machine hoping to be? As the Juggernaut took another lurching step in Jomi's direction, he began to sweat. He crouched. Serpillion shook the bag of rune bones at his waist and sounded like an angry rattlesnake. He then switched on his energy armor. Subtle forces wove a cocoon that clad his body, and he glowed faintly. He too now heard that voice inside his head and shivered at the treachery which the ancient survivor must intend. It was hoping to seize control of the boy's brain and body, dispossessing his spirit, casting it into the limbo of that sea of souls. The Inquisitor stared at the giant gunmetal grey relic, trying in vain to classify it. It was squatter than a battle titan, its limbs less flexibly jointed, nor did any obvious head protrude from the top of its chest in the way that the control heads jutted turtle-like from titans. However, it looked almost as formidable, and what was more, it housed somebody who had endured literally for eons. Nowadays, a marine who had been crippled in combat may be hardwired into a battle machine by way of reward for valor, or an able-bodied but fractious marine may be thus sentenced, a year, or 10 years, or even the rest of his life. In sense, reward and punishment were identical. Serpillion knew of no mechanical system other than the Emperor's enormous immobile prosthetic throne which could sustain a person's existence for aeons. What remnant of flesh and bone could possibly lurk inside that mobile juggernaut? Only the head and spinal column of the castaway? Maybe only the naked brain, bathed in fluids? Or maybe, could such a thing be, only the mind itself, wrought within some intricate interior talisman by ancient eldritch sorcery? That robot was treasure. Its occupant hoped to steal a human brain which housed such great psychic potential to add to its own psychic powers. Whoever controlled such a boy? Serpillion suppressed within himself a tenuous twinge of traitorous ambition. Was he being corrupted by proximity to this monster from the past? 'Tis ever the way. A thin line confronts the foulest enemies. Yet, thank him on earth, that line is stronger than a diamond forged in a supernova. Permission, he requested, to summon the Land Raiders. Yes, do so, but only as a reserve. I don't wish the robot destroyed utterly. Hatchard radioed in a battle code. As the two men stood under a sheaf of stars, a voice piped, "Sirs, sirs!" It was the squat, accompanied by the Ogren bonehead. "Surely that's a robot from the early age of strife, sirs. The portal must lead to a space hulk in the warp, mustn't it? Where else could such a robot have lurked? The hulk must contain, or could contain, a wealth of ancient standard templates.
Yes, little man, agreed Civilian. I do believe that's so.
At that moment, the curfew trumpet shrieked from afar.
Commander, disable the robot. Shoot off its legs.
Hatchard rapped out orders. Almost immediately, plasma and laser beams stitched the deepening night. Yet the beams glanced away, deflected by some shield, even by an aura of invulnerability. For that mind within the machine was potent, was it not? Had it not mad, lonely eons through which to examine and hone its powers? The robot's own inbuilt lasers and plasma cannon fired back, tracking the sources of the energy beams. At the same time, a wave of confusion lapped at Civilian's mind. The creature in the robot possessed psychic weaponry too, it seemed. Something else might share mind space with the occupant of that plasteel refuge, something that wouldn't exactly classify as human company. Civilian had seen to it that the Griefbringers wore protective psychic hoods. Still, in that first onslaught, 2 Marines broke cover, running directly towards the robot. Their suits glowed to start with. The overload filter in Hatchard's radio stole away their screams. Another brave man took advantage of the diversion to advance at a powered run from a different direction, clutching a melter bomb. He was hoping to sacrifice himself by detonating this against one of the robot's feet, thus destabilizing it. Plasma engulfed him, then night erupted briefly as the bomb's thermal energy gushed prematurely, liquefying his suit. The Marines quickly resumed a more disciplined fire. As Civilian squinted at the flaring scene, he could tell that the robot had halted, though it showed precious little sign of disablement. Beams simply slid off it, bouncing away into the sky. "Land raiders arriving on station," said Hatchard. "If we aim their las cannons at one leg in concert, we should be able to bring it down soon enough."
"What if the shielding in the aura hold, even temporary? Fierce energies might recoil unpredictably. The boy might be evaporated in the backlash. If the las cannon beams do break through, the robot might explode."
Couldn't Hatchard guess at the value of this artifact from the Elder Days? Maybe not. He only saw a present menace to the Imperium. Of all those present, save Civilian perhaps, only the squat realized. The Inquisitor could hardly confide in him. Indeed, he might need to silence the little man. Once again, Civilian felt a thread of heretical temptation. He muttered a prayer. "Spurge me, God Emperor. Cleanse me."
"Permission, sir," requested the Sergeant Ogren. "My men, strong. We charge the robot. Wrestle it onto its side."
Hatchard laughed, and it occurred to Civilian that the wave of confusion might have affected the minds of the Ogrins peculiarly. Unlike the Marines, the Abhumans had been shielded only by their own dense skulls and their brutish, if violent, thought processes. The confusion might now only be surfing in their brainiest representative, the Sergeant. "Why not?" said the commander. "Listen carefully, Sergeant. Send all your Ogrins to the north side. Yes, in that direction. Over there. Then you come back to report. As soon as my Marines cease fire, your Ogrins must charge. Do you understand?"
"Yes, sir."
Thunderjug stomped over to his troopers and bellowed at them for a while. "Couldn't one of them just scoop up the boy?" suggested Grim. "They'd probably tear his head off by mistake," snapped Hatchard.
Commander, sir."
"What is it now, Abhuman?"
"Isn't a charge by the Ogrins a mite suicidal?"
"Not necessarily," intervened Civilian.
"The robot replied to fire with fire, but an Ogrin charge might confuse it. I take it that that's the commander's intention, rather than him implying that his hands are tied."
"Huh," said Grim. Thunderjug returned and stood to attention. Jomi clung to the ground in terror as the air blistered above him. "They'll need to change their tactics. A lull must come, and I think I can cause a diversion. When I say, run, sprint to me as fast as you can, ducking low. I can take you inside this body. I can transport you back through the portal. Better the warp than death, don't you think?" The sizzle of lethal beams almost convinced Jomi. Almost. "I shall save you, Jomi. Save you. I am your safety." The voice began to drone hypnotically, bewitchingly. It promised joys. It promised lusts, fulfillments. It seemed savagely bewildered as to what these might be. Did Jomi hear the background hint of crazed laughter? His body twitched, puppet-like. A low, stray laser beam seared his wrist superficially. The pain jerked him free from the growing enchantment, plunging him again into a terrain of terrible fear. "Are you a man or a woman?" he gasped. "I hardly remember." "How can you not remember such a thing?" "It became unimportant, and yet a ghost reminds me of the flesh, a goading wraith within. Ah, show me, I know so much, and I'm so separated from all that I knew. My ghost cries for a body to caress and sculpt to its desire. Come to me soon, Jomi, when I call." From the voice's moaning words, Sapillion gathered ample confirmation that its owner had been a psychic eavesdropper on millennia of war-torn history, and even of that of pre-Imperium. How the Inquisitor thirsted for its knowledge. But the ancient survivor was, also, he strongly suspected, possessed by a demon of the warp. This was an unusual species of possession, for the survivor plainly owned no body at all, other than the fast metal body of the robot. The survivor consisted only of mind, wrought within a talisman of crystal wafers, or some other occult material, a talisman which strove to maintain the stability of the mind, strove with a fair degree of success considering that awesome time span, yet of necessity imperfectly. The demon had no tangible flesh to twist and warp and stamp its mark upon. It could only lurk impotently, glued to the imprisoned mind, tormenting it spasmodically by stimulating memories and sensuous hallucinations. Maybe the goad of the demon was what had prevented the survivor from lapsing into sloth. The voice spoke of science. The truth was corruption. Conclusio, its science was heresy. Sapillion must not thirst for that. And now, the castaway's dark scheme to possess Jomi had failed, a cursed demon-inspired plan. The survivor was intent on at least carrying the boy back into exile with it. At Hatchet's command, the Griefbringers ceased fire. Just as the Ogryn squad commenced its assault, the robot aimed a plasma blast low at the Grok's compound, crisping several beasts, yet also tearing a long gap in the fence. Sapillion sensed the aura of venomous intent which the mind, the robot, the demon, directed at the reptiles to stir their bloodlust. Ripping at one another, Groxen burst free of their captivity and rapidly were attracted towards the thundering giants. All plasma and laser fire had ceased. The Psycho Boy staggered erect and stumbled towards the robot, seeing which, Sapillion let out a cry of frustration. "Catch that lad for the Emperor, Thunderjug!" shouted Grim, as if he were a commander, "and don't pull his head off, unless you have to." No appeal could mean more to an Ogryn. Tossing his encumbering rippergun aside, Thunderjug Agrox bared his tusks and pounded towards the distant youth. The dapper little squat sprinted after the Ogryn, trying his best to keep up, panting. Careless of his own safety, Sapillion loped after them, blood-red cloak streaming, the very image of the avenging angel. The boy must be stopped. A hatch was opening in the lower casing of the robot to welcome the lurching youth. Just then, the stampeding Groxen met the charging Ogryns. The animals leapt, clawed, bit and gouged. They tore chunks of flesh, yet an Ogryn hardly heeded such trivia. Ogryn fists smashed Grok's skulls. However, the robot noticed the boy's pursuers and swiveled a weapon arm, opening fire with a raking of explosive bolts. Sapillion dived flat. Ahead of him, the Ogryn's mighty legs pounded forward for a dozen more strides before the giant crashed to the ground. The squat had darted past. Its cap had fallen off, or had been snatched away by a bolt. The blast grenade, launched from a tube in the robot's arm, exploded near him. The shockwave picked the squat up and threw him several meters. Sprawled on the stony dirt, Sapillion reached out his right arm, forefinger pointing the Jokero Needler. The range was somewhat extreme for such a tiny, lightweight dart. The target was moving. The Inquisitor strove to aim. At that moment, when Jomi was barely 20 meters from the inviting hatch, he halted. A psychic maelstrom of savagery and pain whirled around Jomi. The death shrieks of those who had died, the berserker fury of the Ogryns as they fought the reptiles, the terror of all the energy beams and explosions, all these suddenly accumulated. A lurid radiance seemed to flare in his mind, as if doors were flying open, behind which fierce furnaces raged, cauldrons of burning energy. "Jomi, you've almost reached me. Just a little more and leap inside me." Looking up at the towering machine, Jomi suddenly perceived it, by that blazing light from within him, not as a mountain of metal in approximately humanoid shape, but as a vast, naked Galandra Pushik looming over him lustfully. Her legs were squat trunks, the hatch was her secret opening, her enormous torso thick with fat, writhed with desire to entertain him. Her great muscular arms reached out. "Jomi, my dearest delicious boy, my joy." What confronted him was a robot again, yet the light from within him did not cease. It changed hue and wavelength, and so he peered, appalled, into the world that what might be. Assisted by a tentacle, he had leapt into a womb of steel, a metal pod barely large enough to stand up in. The tentacle withdrew, and he was thrown back upon the floor as the robot rocked, starting to march towards the portal, brushing aside the brawling bodies of the brutal giants and rabid Gropsin, its cleated feet crushed deep craters. The hatch was descending to close him in, though, while it was still open, by the resuming, spasming light of energy beams, Jomi glimpsed a man in a glowing breastplate and a blood-red cloak, a thin, tall man with a drooping black moustache and a staring eye tattooed upon his cheek, sprinting frantically towards the decamping robot. Jomi could hear the man's thumping thoughts. "Even if I can paralyze him, too late to drag the boy out. At least cling to some handhold on the robot. Don't lose it entirely, or all has been in vain. Accompany it willy-nilly through the doorway of darkness. Will there be air on the other side of the portal? Will all atmosphere have long since leaked out of the hulk? Will there be only vacuum to boil my blood and collapse my lungs like empty paper bags? My energy armor will be no protection for that fate." The body that carried him lurched and swayed. Little lights. It winked on. Jomi hugged his own body protectively. How could he escape from this pod? Surely he couldn't live inside this miniature chamber, even if the machine fed him. He imagined the narrow floor aswill with his urine, in which nuggets of excrement bobbed. "Welcome to my kingdom," the voice purred. Bitter mockery tinged the accents Jomi heard in his mind. "Our kingdom too. Mine too." A malicious, disappointed echo seemed to haunt the voice, perhaps unheard by it, perhaps all too familiar. Failure. Feeble failure. But there's a soft body, at least. The lid of a small porthole slid aside. Jomi pressed his face to the thick plastic crystal as floodlight beams lanced from the robot. He stared at a great grotto of metal, from which several steel tunnels ran away into the Stygian gloom. Strange machines jutted from the plated floor and from the ribbed walls. A debris of loose tools and cargo floated like dead fish in a dank pond. "There's one other such machine as mine on board," the voice confided, as if oblivious to the soft, sinister echo that Jomi had heard. "It has been inactive for millennia, lacking a person's mind to fill it. But now I can revive it. With my science, I'll put you into it. First, of course, I'll need to cut away your body. That'll be an exquisite hour or so." Jomi vomited in terror. "Soon, before you use all the air I sucked in on that moon. Once you're activated, we can play games. Hide and seek, for instance. You'll need to rely on the resources of your lovely mind. At least I'll have company now. Oh, the madness. My madness. Maybe my imaginary companion will go away. Into you, maybe." A figure in a blood-red cloak drifted into view, out of the giant grotto, its frozen arms stretched out vainly towards a vista which, prior to the flare of illumination, couldn't possibly have seen. What might be, and still might be, vanished. Jomi still stood before the robot. "Daemon, daemon, daemon, daemon!" he shrieked at it. He spat. Reaching into his memory for an incantation, he recalled Farb's prayers and howled, "Imperiata, honorarium, nostala, salviato! Jomi, do not betray me!" The white-hot cauldron inside Jomi spilled over. The inner furnaces, so suddenly revealed to him, gushed psychic fire. Hardly knowing how, he sprayed a mountain of defensive mental energy, ill-focused, yet powerful, at the voice which would have betrayed him. "Nostra salviato honorarium impariata!" Cried the voice, keening through his head like a scalpel blade, attempting to sever the sinews of his newfound psychic ability, raw and unshaped as yet. Recoiling, his brain in agony, Jomi nevertheless summoned another sprout of hot repulsion to hurl at the robot. The boy's raw power, and his piety too, albeit born of terror. Bathed in the backlash of inner light from the volcanic upheaval within the boy, his own senses extended, Sepilian had partaken of Jomi's vision of what might be. As if an actor in Jomi's dream, the Inquisitor had experienced the death agony of passing through the portal, of collapsing lungs, of utter, absolute chill. He had also known Jomi's claustrophobic, dreadful dismay. Moments later, Cipillion found himself still sprawled on the battlefield, and it was a battlefield that was blessed by contrast. Scrambling up, Cipillion signalled back towards Hatchet, hoping that the commander could see and would understand his gestures. Then he resumed his reckless run towards the boy, who was holding the robot at bay, like a rat defying a bull. He no longer pointed his Jokero needler. Casting his own aura of protection, Cipillion seized Jomi by the shoulder. "In the Emperor's name, come with me, boy. Come with me to safety. Come swiftly, Jomi Jabal." Hatchet must have understood. As soon as Cipillion had hauled the boy to some reasonable remove and had ducked with him behind a boulder, the las cannons of the land raiders opened fire. Shaft upon shaft of searing energy lanced at the robot. The marine infantry added their contribution. Wounded Ogrins scattered, abandoning their remaining Groxen which had been occupying them. Had the giants not engaged with the savage reptiles, by now one of those may have attacked Cipillion or the boy. The robots launched jets of plasma and energy beams. A land raider exploded, raining hot shards of plasteel. Several marines fell victims to beams and jets. The Imperial energies cascaded off the robot shields, pluming into the sky, rendering the landscape bright as day. Yet the robot seemed confused. It backed, it lumbered. Perhaps the mind within it was anguished. Perhaps, infected by Jomi's vision, it imagined that it had passed safely through the portal, though the nightmare evidence was otherwise. Perhaps it was running low on energy. At last, an Imperial energy beam tore loose a weapon arm. Another beam pierced the vulnerable hatch. Part of the robot's mantle flared and melted. Still firing, but falteringly now, seemingly at random, the great damaged machine stomped back towards the portal. Land Raider beams focused in unison upon its back, so when it seemed to be propelled in its retreat by a hurricane, torn, white-hot sail woven from the heart of a sun. As it entered the portal, the robot glowed blindingly. A detonation as of 100 simultaneous sonic booms rocked the torn terrain. Glaring fragments of the robot's carapace flew back like angry boomerangs, like scythes. The bulk of the disintegrating body pitched forward, out of existence, vanishing. Cipillion deactivated his energy armor, and Jomi, smeared with dirt and stinking of sweat, wept in his arms. "I shall," vowed Cipillion, "recommend you for the finest training, as an Inquisitor yourself." The boy cried, What? I can't hear. Only the awful, terrible thunder." "Your hearing will return," Cipillion shouted into the boy's streaked face. "If not, that can be repaired. One day you will serve the Emperor, as I serve him. I came a long way to find you." After a while, Jomi listened to Cipillion's thoughts instead and began to understand. The cloaked figure had come a long way to find him. Why, so had the mind and the demon in the robot. Jomi would be sent far away from this wretched moon to Earth itself. He thought fleetingly of Gretchi, but as the voice had suggested, that kind of yearning seemed to have become extremely insignificant. Groaning and rubbing his head, Grim ambled back to where the bonehead lay sprawled. But it was undeniable that Thunderjug's whole skull was missing. He said. Bilious-hued power armor loomed. "I watched him charge," said Hatchet. "The other subhumans remain alive, I think so by and large, but not their sergeant. The Griefbringers are honoured by his bravery." "What about me?" thought Grim. "I nearly got blown to pieces." But he said nothing. It was Thunderjug who was dead. Bending, assisted by the squat, Hatchet dragged the Ogren's corpse into his powered arms. As Grim gazed into the indigo sky, the stars stared back at him blindly. The portal had disappeared a while since, yet a tremor seemed to twist the night air, warping the heavens. Or was it distortion, due to the moisture in his eyes?